Hi, welcome to Punchline Talks, the business breakfast briefers. My name's Mark Owen, and each week I invite a panel of business experts to review the morning newspapers, find out what's happening in their own individual business and their own individual business sectors, and finally, what's caught their eye in this week's Punchline. I've got a fantastic panel of experts, but before I start, I'd just like to thank our wonderful sponsors, Hayswood's Accountants and Business Advisors. Okay, let's meet the guys today. We've got Chris Pockett. He's head of communications at Renishaw. The engineering company celebrated 50 years this year and just opened applications for 65 apprenticeships across Gloucestershire and South Wales. So we find all about that, Chris, and what type of year Renishaw has had as well. We've got Councillor Max Wilkinson, lead for economic development, culture, tourism, well-being for Cheltenham Borough Council, and he's also the parliamentary candidate for the Lib Dems in Cheltenham, and he must be rubbing his hands and clapping with glee this morning with the headlines we've got going on. And then we've got David Jones, MD of Cheltenham-based property planning and consultants, David Jones from Evans Jones, who has just done this week also a wonderful rather walkthrough with me. But anyway, we won't go into that too much for now. Let's have a look at what's making the headlines. So, courtesy of the BBC, we got the Eye, wounded PM faces growing rebellion. The Guardian, Sunak fights to hold Tories together over Rwanda plan. The Times, I'm going to pick the top line here. The ex-MI6 chief amongst hundreds targeted by the Russian hackers. The Telegraph, ousting PM would be insanity, says Tory chairman. The Mirror, Tories are imploding. The Daily Mail, Rishi, I get it. Now back me to finish the job. The Metro, Ofsted's brutal inhumanity. The Daily Mail, Minister immoral to threaten jail over licence fee. The Sun, staff too scared to speak out. The Financial Times, Labour enlists 10 city advisors to help cement confidence of business sector. And the Daily Star, an airport smuggler is caught with half a zoo down his undies. Is that a prairie dog and 2 otters in your pocket, or are you just pleased to see me? Don't you just love the Daily Star? Okay, right. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Max, what have you picked out from us, please?
Thanks, Mark. Well, thanks for selecting a lot of headlines there that were difficult for my opponents. It'd be very easy for me just to sort of revel in the difficulties that they're having at the moment, obviously over immigration. I have to say, when I go and chat to people on the doorstep, the 2 top things that come up are actually the cost of living and the NHS. And it's those issues related to migration, which I think we should probably be focusing on a little more, rather than just having a constant sort of Tory party psychodrama about whether they are being harsh enough on immigration policy or not. And it was this story on page 7 of the Eye that caught my attention. Cutting foreign workers could push up inflation. And of course, if we're thinking about the big challenges that we have in the economy, and Conservative ministers constantly say this, they're talking about inflation and the cost of living, and that is still the number one thing that's bothering people locally in Cheltenham, and I'm sure across the rest of the county, and indeed all of the businesses who are regularly appearing in Punchline. And it's interesting that sometimes this issue of immigration is viewed as something where there are no trade-offs. People will just say, cut immigration, our problems will be solved. And actually on that point, my daughter was in Gloucestershire Royal for an operation yesterday morning, incredibly stressful thing as a parent, as we all know. But it was notable when walking around the hospital corridors, the number of people there who were clearly not born in the UK and had come across from other countries to work in our health service, providing really important services to us. And sometimes some of those people will actually be, due to the immigration rules, paying for NHS care if they need it themselves, even though they're working within the NHS. Such are the rules that we place in this country. And I was really grateful to the team on the children's outpatients ward for their help yesterday, and they were really reassuring. But we shouldn't be under any illusion that if we just suddenly removed all migration from the UK economy, that businesses would not suffer, and indeed our public services. So it's really interesting when you read these articles that are in some of the newspapers, which don't focus on some of those trade-offs, and we shouldn't be under any illusion there. And what the Eye is pointing out here is that there's a couple of experts. One of them is a professor of economics at the University of Oxford, and another is from the Institute of Directors, and they're putting across the opinions there that really are often missed out in the headlines and the front pages of this discussion. So I think it's just important for us to pick up on that, because if we don't have people to do those really important jobs in the private sector, but also in our public services, we will lose out, and things will possibly become even more difficult for our country in the future.
Well, I think that's very well said, actually, to be honest with you. I've got to totally agree with you, Max. It seems to have gone completely bonkers, and we need foreign workers. It's quite simple as that, isn't it? And getting the right type of people to do the right type of jobs. Thanks ever so much for that, Max. I'm going to go over to you, Chris. Obviously, you're one of the biggest employees within the county. You know, is it 2,900 we have here in Gloucestershire?
It's about 2,600 mark.
And how many in Wales as well?
It's between 700. It's just over 700.
Wow.
But
Okay, so you know, I mean, obviously, you must be watching the government as well, because I know you take in a lot of local talent as well. But do you use foreign workers at Renishaw?
Not in a way that you might imagine. I mean, we're not typically recruiting people from overseas. So what you tend to find is that most of the people that were not born in the UK that work at Renishaw, well, they're either in our overseas operations, because we're in 36 countries, so it's really global, and most of our global offices or offices outside the UK are staffed by obviously locals. There are some expats involved because of the specialist nature of our business, but generally the majority are locals that are in the overseas offices. Or if it's in the UK, then it tends to be people that are already in the UK, they're either studied in the UK or have come from, say, EU nations that then end up at Renishaw. We don't tend to be recruiting directly from the sort of EU and beyond. It tends to be indirect. And we also have staff that are working in the UK. I can think of some in the HQ office that actually have come from India and other of our other offices around the world, because again, they've got specialist skills, and as a global business, you want the best talent wherever it's required. So it's a real mix. It's quite a complex picture. It's not that straightforward. But our numbers are quite low. We looked at this around Brexit time, and actually our numbers in the UK, I think we had something like 100 out of around 3,200 people in the UK that we employ. I think about 90 or 100 were from EU nations, but the majority of those were already living in the UK when we recruited them.
Right. Okay. No, thanks for filling that in. And what have you picked out from us for the papers, Chris?
Okay, so slightly different. So obviously we are 17 days from the big day. Scarily, I better start shopping soon. Although, being a man, obviously most of that will be done online, probably about 3 days before, and relying on Amazon Prime. So Christmas-related story. So this is about the Panama Canal. So Panama Canal is responsible for around 3% of world trade, and a high percentage of the products that come from the US actually come through the Panama Canal. And there's a problem at the moment, and has been for a while, because of water shortages. So lack of rainfall is basically 41% lower than normal. So their wet season, which runs from April to November, and that's affected the reservoirs or lakes that are actually feeding the Panama Canal. It's the only major shipping route in the world that's actually reliant on fresh water. Most of the others, like Suez and others, obviously rely on salt water. So what's the issue with that? Well, they've had to limit the number of ships going through the Panama Canal. So it usually would be about 40 ships a day. That's now down to 30, and could actually reduce further. How's that a problem for the UK and Europe? Because a lot of products like TVs, mobile phones, exercise bikes, Christmas sweaters as well could be in short supply. I'm sure some people are probably quite pleased about that, but also food as well. So things like cherries, grapes, plums, nectarines, and blueberries. Apparently, a lot of those are coming in containers from the Americas through the Panama Canal. So potentially some shortage. Don't want to, not a scare story. Don't go out and sort of stockpile blueberries,
bully jumpers or bully blueberries,
or Christmas jumpers. But an interesting one, and yet arguably something else linked to climate change. Part of it's El Nino, but also there's a sense from scientists that climate change may well be prolonging dry spells. So there's real practical issues, and what are the effects of climate change? Where they're multifaceted, but here's a very practical sort of immediate issue that's being caused that will probably affect us all in some way, shape, or form. So that's just one that I've picked out this morning because it's kind of Christmas related, and I thought we're that close to Christmas, we ought to do something broadly around the festive season, but a slightly different take on it.
No, thanks ever so much for that, Chris. I didn't know that at all, actually. I didn't realise that 40 ships down to 30 ships. But you can see how that would work. David, let's go over to you. David, what have you picked out from the papers, please? Thanks for that, Chris.
Good morning. I try to keep things light, as we're in the Christmas season. Quite difficult with this morning's papers, I must say. But I did find something in the mail. Health and safety. 21 million suffer injuries preparing for Christmas. So, somebody's done a bit of research, found that 5% of injuries are caused by people lifting Christmas trees or standing on chairs to put Christmas baubles up, 6% burning themselves on hot oil over the Christmas period, 7% cutting themselves on vegetables. So a crazy story, but and a lovely headline, health and safety. But on a more serious note, interesting that house prices have risen for the second month in succession. So an article from the Times this morning, a 0.5% rise in November, fueled, and I would tend to agree with this, by a shortage of properties. I mean, it's obviously this is my world, but I am seeing the bigger developers certainly slow the build out rate of sites, and I think the SMEs are finding securing planning permission and getting sites off the ground as difficult as ever. So it's when the sort of underlying sort of economic conditions would perhaps suggest a decline in house prices, and certainly they have been declining up to the last couple of months. The statistics are, the information from the Halifax, I think this was, are contrary to that. So it does show, I think, the lack of supply this year. We know the government have a notional target of 300,000 homes per annum to be built, although they've pulled back from that slightly. This year we will build about 170,000. So it's nearly half the notional target. We're expecting the new national planning policy framework to be published probably early next week. It's highly likely that will water down local authorities' requirement to meet housing targets. Regrettably, that will further strangle supply. There's no getting away from that. Max may disagree with me, but if you ask the settled community where they'd like houses, generally they'd like them somewhere else. And that does manifest itself in making it difficult to secure planning permission locally. But all of that is a bit of a perfect storm. Build costs are still very high. So in a lot of areas of the country, viability of building is actually quite difficult because the cost of building is outstripping the value of properties when built, or at least not generating sufficient profit. So a little bit of a perfect storm, but the result is that house prices have not dropped for the second month in a row.
All right. No, thanks so much for that, David. It's a really great insight there, and it leads me very nicely back over to Max. You could have teed it up nicer for me, actually, because obviously the Golden Valley development is moving forward, and there's thousands of houses that are going to go in there. The big story that caught my eye there was about Factory and X Factor, wasn't it? Not X Factory. Was it called HB? Should know this.
HBD.
Thank you very much. Yes, early in the morning.
Henry Boot.
Forces. So yeah, Max, can you give us an overview of what's happening with the Golden Valley?
Well, obviously, what we'll see at the Golden Valley is over the next 10 years or so, a really important, important locally, but also nationally significant development being built out. There's going to be thousands of new homes and also an awful lot of space for commercial operations as well. And that will help us build on our USP in Cheltenham, which is in the tech and cyber sector. Clearly, we've got a lot of people who are working at GCHQ already in the cybersecurity sector, and having the National Cyber Innovation Centre right next door as part of the Golden Valley development will allow our local expertise in that sector to grow and to flourish. But it's going to be jobs that will be really good for local people. It's not just going to be high-tech jobs. There will be all kinds of jobs there, both in the construction and then in the long term at the site. And importantly, we're building to really high environmental standards as well, which is what people in Cheltenham would expect. On that note, I did note that there was a story in Punchline about the local MP Alex Chalk touring a new development at Leckhampton. A load of zero carbon homes have been built there. And of course, we've managed to, in Cheltenham, put in place a supplementary planning document on climate change, which means that developers in the private sector, the people who David works with, are now bringing forward developments of a much, much higher standard than they would have been in the past. Even Persimmon Homes in Cheltenham is pursuing net zero carbon neutral style developments, which is quite an important thing. But where we're held back, of course, is that the government isn't reforming planning as it said it would. So our local guidance is far in advance of what the government allows us to actually enforce. So I have some sympathy with what David says there, but I think it's about getting the right development, the right kind of development in the right place. I don't think people are unreasonable about this. The planning system can be a check on housing, but it need not be. It's just about doing it in a way that brings people along with us. And in Cheltenham, of course, the Golden Valley development will bring a lot of jobs and a lot of prosperity, and it will help support local educational organisations like Gloucestershire College, the university, and other local universities as well. But then if we look at where else in Cheltenham we ought to be delivering more houses, there is a really interesting story in Punchline this week about the redevelopment above Cobbler's Corner and brownfield sites and making better use of space above shops and in town centres, developing some of those car parks that have been sort of awaiting housing development over a long time. That's an area of focus for us too, because on the sustainability front, having more people living in the town centre, whether it's families, whether it's young people looking for their first properties, or whether it's older people, is just going to be much more sustainable for us. So it's about getting the right mix of development there. And I think in Cheltenham, we've got quite a positive story to tell, even though, as David rightly pointed out, house prices are going up across the country and making them unaffordable for lots of people, and the market doesn't work for too many of us. But in Cheltenham, we still do have very high house prices, and we need to be mindful of that and the check that might have on business growth in the area, the ability to attract people to live here in the first place, and then staff retention as well, which is why we need that housing investment in social and affordable housing, which we're doing in Cheltenham to a large extent as well. So you should see, in excess of £100 million worth of investment in affordable homes in Cheltenham over the coming years, which places us in a fairly elite class of, smallish to average-sized district councils.
Because I never really understood, and maybe David could help me here. It's obviously important that we build more houses to make sure our young people stay here, to keep, retain the talent here, which obviously companies like Renishaw need and David's own company need. Why there weren't all these new houses being built over the last couple of years don't have solar panels built on them when they actually build the things, the same as business parks? Why aren't solar panels automatically put on top of business parks? So David, I got to ask you that. Why?
It's massively frustrating, and I actually agree with Max that Cheltenham have been quite insightful in preparing and adopting a climate change SPD. Now that is guidance rather than rigid policy, so it does make it quite difficult to force developers to install these, what they should be installing, really. Cheltenham Borough Council were quite brave in refusing consent for a Miller Homes development in Sherdington because they had gas boilers. Miller Homes then relented and offered to fit air source heat pumps throughout, and we're still awaiting that decision from the government, as far as I understand. But Cheltenham have tried, and I think it's good and laudable. Developers will regrettably build to the lowest common denominator, and which is building regulation standards. I'm expecting that as heating costs and the cost of living crisis perhaps bites further, and certainly the cost of electric and gas for our homes rises, that the efficiency of homes will become more of an issue to the purchaser. It hasn't really to date. People will still buy a home because they like the location and they like the kitchen, rather than how efficient it is. I would expect that to change, and I think we are seeing, with the developments that Max has just mentioned, some inroads into developers actually grasping the spectre of climate change and actually using that as a selling mechanism. So that's good. On the commercial sector, we are seeing some inroads into commercial, very inefficient commercial properties won't be able to be let. So that is going to force landlords, to upgrade their properties. But that's, skimming at the edges, really. That isn't really making great inroads into efficiency and less reliance on certainly gas. So those are the reasons. Those are the reasons why I agree government should have far better sustainability and climate change policies that apply nationally. Now, the developers will say we can't afford to do that. It's going to put the price of houses up. I tend to disagree with that. It's not the same across the country, but if a house costs more to build, then the land is worth less. The value of the home is dictated by the market, not what it costs to build. So, in areas you will get properties that then become unviable because the land prices mean that land isn't sold. But certainly in higher value areas like here and the southeast, land value uplift is significant and can take some pain in helping to decarbonise our housing stock and commercial stock.
Okay, thanks ever so much for filling us in there. I mean, I look around and all I see is house building everywhere. It seems that way anyway. Thanks ever so much for filling us in, both of you there. Chris, let's go over to you. Renishaw, obviously, you employ an awful lot of apprentices over the year. I've just got this press release, basically hot off the press, as they say, and you guys are looking to take on another 64 apprentices this year. Tell us how important they are to the business, and what kind of jobs these will lead up to.
Well, hugely important. So as you said earlier, Renishaw celebrated 50 years this year. So we formed in April '73. Started as a Welsh company, actually. So we were registered to the home of one of our co-founders, John Deere, who lived in Chepstow. In 1976, we'd outgrown his house and his garage and spare bedroom. And so we need commercial premises. And fortunately for Gloucestershire, I guess, the decision was made to buy a former ice cream factory in Wotton-Under-Edge, which is actually no longer there, no longer exists. It's now the car park for Wotton Town Council, for the Civic Centre. So we started apprenticeships really early, so within 6 years of the company existing. So we took our first apprentice in 1979. The co-founders are apprentices. They're not degree qualified, but they haven't done too badly. And we've taken apprentices every single year since, even during recessions when we've had some challenges, as you'll be aware, over the last sort of 15 plus years. But even during the difficult years that we've had, we've actually ring-fenced our apprenticeship program because it's so important, because it's the long game, and that's something that Renishaw is noted for. We invest for the long term. We put millions into R&D, so for future product development. So we spend somewhere between 12 and 20% of annual revenue goes back into research and development, which is incredibly high. It puts us in a sort of level of a pharmaceutical and biotechnology company in terms of original research. And we invest for the long term in our, our properties, our property portfolio, sales and marketing. We generally try and get into markets ahead of sales, so we don't necessarily wait for things to get to a certain level and think, oh, now we feel we can afford to invest. We look at the potential of a market, and China's a great example of that. So 1993, we opened an office in Hong Kong, which is then obviously still ruled by the UK. But in 94, we opened the first office in Beijing when our turnover in China was about £250,000. Today, China represents over 20%, of our total turnover, which is around 680 million. So we're always thinking ahead, and the apprenticeship program is very much part of that long-term thinking. And if you look around the business, there's lots and lots of senior people and specialists in the business who have come through the apprenticeship route, and we've developed that over the years. It used to be primarily around manufacturing and some engineering, and now Max talked about jobs for the wider community, and I think that's one thing that as a manufacturing company, we've got jobs for everybody, and now we have apprenticeships for everybody as well. So we're taking people on. I think we've got a plumbing apprenticeship, an electrician apprenticeship. We've got such a lot of property. I mean, our property portfolio is enormous now. We're investing in, as you're aware, in South Wales, the site, we're investing £65 million to more than double the capacity of the site in just the west of Cardiff on junction 34, the M4, the Valleys junction. And that's will give us then over 1 million square foot of space for our future development, primarily for manufacturing. And we're taking apprentices into South Wales as well. But the majority of our employees are still in Gloucestershire, so the majority of apprenticeships are here. But it's everything. It's all around manufacturing engineering, but software engineering, software testing, IT. As I say, it's a broad portfolio of apprenticeships now that we have, over 20 schemes.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic, the amount of people that you employ as well here, Chris. Just very, very briefly, what kind of year has Renishaw had? Has it been difficult trading, or is it,
Yeah, it's challenging. One of our key markets, one of the most important markets, is semiconductor chip manufacture, and that's it's a very cyclical market, and it will come back, and we're preparing for it to come back, and the investment in Wales is part of that to give us the capacity that when it does come back, we can gear up very quickly. We do the majority of our manufacturing ourselves. We're a very vertically integrated business, and it gives us a lot of flexibility, and we're able to do, coming out of COVID, when there was a huge ramp up in supply chains around the world, there were difficulties, there were real challenges, but we were in a great position to actually take business from our competitors around the world, because we're able to respond a lot quicker than many, because we're so integrated. We do so much of our own manufacturing, whether that's metal component manufacturing. We actually assemble our own printed circuit boards as well. So, which not a lot of companies of our size would necessarily do. They would contract that out. But our philosophy has always been to do as much in-house as we can. But that has definitely affected us. So our turnover, our financial year is July to June. So for the period ended June of this year, our revenue was up 3%, but that was because of the benefit of currency, primarily because of the dollar. Because we obviously, because we're a global business, so our sales are taken at a local level, so we'll earn sales in dollars or yen or euros or whatever it may well be, and then obviously convert that back to pounds. And the dollar was pretty strong, so that gave us a boost. But if you strip out the effects of currency, our turnover was down 1%. And we're doing well in some areas, but the reality is we can't do much about the cycle that we're in with the semiconductor manufacturing sector. But we'll come back, and confident about that. We're still investing. It's not like we've cut our investment. We are still powering ahead with that investment. We've always taken the long-term view, and that's the way we've always run the business. And we get these short-term motivations, but we're confident that we'll see that through, and that things will gradually pick up.
No, fantastic. Thanks ever so much for that, Chris. Gives us a real great insight into the company. We're going to running out of time already, so I'm going to go back to the pick of the punchlines. Max, what have you picked out for us from this week's punchline, please?
Well, mine was one of the stories I mentioned very briefly earlier on about the conversion above Cobbler's Corner. And David and I have sat in a few meetings where we've chatted about our empty shop strategy for the town centre. And clearly, all high streets are changing, all town centres are changing. Cheltenham's is faring much better than most places. And when I went to do a bit of Christmas shopping on the high street in over the last few days, on the weekend in particular, it was extremely busy, and we're thriving. But it doesn't mean that perhaps we don't have the wrong balance of premises in the town centre. Part of our empty shop strategy is to enable conversions to residential. Some that are shops, being converted from ground to top floor, but others which will be space that is unused above shops. And the development at Cobbler's Corner looks like it's going to be retail on the ground floor with 2 new flats created above. And we've got to overcome heritage and conservation concerns and that sort of thing. But town centre living is really important and it's really sustainable. So I'm pleased that after the Empty Shops report was published, the planning team on the Borough Council seemed to be now working with that and making sure that we are more able to deliver more houses in the town centre. It will make us more prosperous. It's not going to solve all of our need for new housing land. It's fair to say, we can probably only do about 1,000 or so premises on brownfield in Cheltenham, and the government will tell us that we need to supply much more land for housing than that. But it is an important step forward, and it really importantly, for the prosperity of our town centre, having more people living close to the town centre, in close proximity to shops, will mean that those shops are likely to have more customers. And shops, cafes, bars, restaurants, places like Roxy Lanes where you can go and have a game of pool as well, or Flight Club where you can play darts. There's all kinds of things going on in town centres now in a way that it wasn't in the past. And I think we need to make sure that planning rules and local government decisions reflect that. So I'm pleased to see the Cobbler's Corner application has come forward, and I'm hoping that we can see much more like that in future.
Okay, no, thanks very much. No, very important story, I thought that as well. David, we're running out of time, so what have you picked out for us, please?
So very quickly, one that I suspect, I don't know why, maybe close to your own interests. Local newspaper bosses launch scathing attack on the BBC. What about that? So the BBC are coming for you, Mark.
I think they are. I think they're coming for everybody. Don't get me started. They're looking to. I think they're looking to launch 34 regional websites.
Yes.
And if they do that, what they're going to be doing, rather than being a radio station and obviously broadcast, they're looking to be a kind of news outlet. Well, they've already got their news outlet, but a regional news outlet. And I feel that's very fair, very unfair competition. That's my view.
Well, I guess a subsidised national organisation, it's difficult, particularly where perhaps they've pulled back on local radio, and this is where perhaps they see their local future. But yeah, I think it's not a good thing. But I'll say no more than that.
Thank you very much, Chris. What have you picked out for us?
Okay, story about Spotify. So not a local story specifically, but they're looking at 1,500, cutting 1,500 staff around the world. I think some of us have a bit of a sort of love-hate relationship with Spotify. It makes music very accessible, and through it you discover new artists. But on the flip side, what artists gain from exposure on Spotify is pitifully low. It's less than half a pence a stream, I think. So in the days when we will, probably most of us will have bought a lot of vinyl. I'm buying a lot of vinyl again, and part of the reason for that is to actually support the bands that I like. A lot of grassroots music, as you know, and Spotify it's caused huge issues in the industry, and the grassroots music industry is really struggling because bands get something like 10 to 20% of the sale of a CD or vinyl. So vinyl's around £25. You're getting somewhere between £2.50 and £5. But to get an equivalent off Spotify, you'd be tens and tens of thousands of streams. And This really makes it very difficult for bands at a low level. And a lot of venues are closing as well. The way that a lot of bands first get exposure is closing, and sadly, locally, Bath Moles announced this week that it's closing. And that's sort of it's been a mainstay of the local music scene for many years, and where people like Ed Sheeran and Oasis cut their teeth in early in their career, and those places are all disappearing. There's been 120 local music venues disappeared nationally within the last year, and we're seeing it all the time. So I think the message is, if you like music, get out and support it. Get out and support bands, go out and buy vinyl, buy merchandise, buy T-shirts, because that's how the sector thrives, and will give us the next Ed Sheeran and Oasis and all those other big bands which you now go and pay £200 to £300 a ticket for to see them in huge stadiums. But the problem is, at the grassroots, it's not a great scene at the moment. There's a lot of bands going under. Bands that I know and that I really like have folded within the last months, and a lot of venues are closing as well. So the only way we're going to, ensure that the British music scene remains vibrant, and it is, respected globally. But if all these venues go, where are from a strategic point of view, the music industry earns a lot of revenue for the UK, and if we don't nurture that the grassroots talent, where are these new bands going to come from?
And also, all the pubs are closing as well, but they used to play.
That's a lot of it. Clearly, it's a complete link here. I mean, there's a lot of economic pressures, we know, for a lot of small businesses.
I'm going to go quickly back, because I've got to finish this. I was going to pick that story as well from Punchline, the actual rise of the BBC websites, because obviously the decline of the strength of local media, as in the Citizen, the Echo, things like this, which all of them are being attacked by Facebook and social media companies. They're not making they're not making the money that they need to, and hence it goes into clickbait sort of stuff. There really is a fundamental problem with democracy, that we do not support kind of local media. And I'm sure, Max, this will come an election and things like that, it poses a bigger question. But anyway, that's for another show. We've run out of time. Thank you ever so much, my fantastic panel today. Thanks ever so much for watching as well. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, Hazelwood's Accountants and Business Advisors. And we'll be back next week for a very special Christmas special. Catch you then. Thanks all ever so much. Bye.